Well, Bruchim Abayim, Shalom everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tuesday Night Beit Midrash, where we are going through different midot, different attributes, to help us walk in a more close relationship with God through Yeshua as our Messiah. This week we're following up on last week's teaching on love. It's an incredible midah, an attribute that relationship is based on. So I'm grateful and thankful that you have chosen to join me here. You've had 1,000 different options, but you have chosen to be here with us at Derech HaYashar Ministries, and for that we are absolutely grateful. I want to remind you to like and share these broadcasts so that we can have the maximum effect as far as reaching people and touching people with these teachings. So, before we begin, as always, let us do our blessing before the Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by your commandments and commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. So let's begin with Matthew 22, verses 36 through 40. It says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Yeshua said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So what Yeshua said is that all of the law and the prophets hang on these two, which center around what? What is contained in both of these? Well, it's love. Love is contained in these two commandments. And all of the law and all of the prophets hang on these two concepts, loving your God and loving your neighbor. As I taught last week, there is so much misinformation and misunderstanding about what love actually is. We're going to dig even deeper into this thing called love tonight to see what we can uncover. Let's see what emerges and rises to the top so that we can have a better understanding. It's my belief that surface understanding of Scripture and surface understanding of concepts relating to relationship is doing ourselves a disservice. We're not doing all that we can do. We need to be very active and proactive in our relationships, how we relate to God and how we relate to one another. And just going on the surface level is just not going to cut it. So let's go deeper. Let's go into a very deep understanding of this subject. Okay, so let's look at Ephesians chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. It says, "Therefore be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love as Messiah also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you as is fitting for saints. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know, that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man, who is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Messiah and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them." Okay, so what Paul tells us in this passage in the beginning is that walking in love is an imitation of God and the Messiah. Walking in love is a sweet-smelling aroma to God. And then he goes on in verses 8 through 10 in Ephesians chapter 5. He said, "For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth, finding out what is acceptable to the Lord. So looking at the context of this, for too many years, Bible study has been relegated to this verse, this set of verses together that illustrate the point I want. But I want to take a look at the broader context of what Paul's talking about in this passage, because just 6 verses after he says, walk in love, he pairs that with walking in light. He pairs it together with walking in light, as though they are exactly the same thing. Okay, in 1 John 2:10, the Apostle John makes the exact same connection. He says, he who loves his brother abides in the light, and there is no cause for stumbling in him. So are you seeing the connection here now? We're seeing that walking in love and walking in light are very much connected to one another. So if we read a quote from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, it says, everything goes after the beginning. What does he mean? Well, in Psalm 119, 130, it says, the entrance of your words gives light. Or more accurately translated as the beginning of your words shall shine light. This means that in the beginning, there was light. And it was because Hashem spoke, and there was light. You understand? He spoke, and there was light. If love and light are connected, as we have seen from the Brit Hadashah, then those words were words of love. When God spoke, and it became light, if love and light are connected, then these words then are also connected to light and love. So through the creation account in Genesis, God was showing love by providing for those he would create in his image. You understand where I'm coming from? God spoke, and it was connected to light, and light is connected to love. So we're going to look at words and love and light. Okay? The word for love in Hebrew is the word ahava. Okay? This particular word is an acronym. It's an acronym for the phrase Or HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It means the light of the Holy One, blessed be He. Okay? We also have the acronym for Ahava Veratzon, love and goodwill. Okay? So with the word Ahava, the word for love, is the light of the Holy One. Rabbi Ginsburg, in his book called The Mystery of Marriage, states this. He says, we see that the beginning and essence of all speech is light. The verbal expression of light is words of love. One's emotions may be thought of as radiating or shining outward to the world. Love is the first and primary emotion. It makes one care enough to extend oneself into and relate to reality. Okay, so having looked at these different aspects already, we see that speech and love are closely intertwined. Speech, as a human being, gives us an advantage over the animals, over the animal kingdom. According to the sages, man's ability to communicate is a direct result of the nefesh chaya. It was the soul that God breathed into man in the beginning. You see, the Targum, which is the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, translates this verse, or this phrase, nefesh chaya, as a speaking spirit. So man has the ability to communicate his inward thoughts and emotions outwards to others. Additionally, the sages have connected this with marital relations. Marital relations are the most intense and intimate form of communication between a man and a woman. See, the natural outworking of that connection is that misusing one's ability to communicate effectively with another through speech is equivalent to misusing one's marital relational energy because they both destroy the ability to make a close connection and relationship. The opposite is also true. Okay, rectifying one's speech is directly related to improving one's marital relations. You see, the two go hand in hand. They are both means of communication and relating to one another. And whenever it's broken, it hinders the relationship. It creates an issue and a problem and a separation between two people. Okay, it goes without saying that Lashon Hara is an evil trait that should be stricken from every believer's vocabulary, speech, relationship that they have. It just goes without saying, because we study this through the Torah portions every year as we go through the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, as we talk about Tzera'at, we talk about the origin of Tzera'at or biblical leprosy as it pertains to evil speech, speaking evil about another person. Okay? So we're not talking about Lashon Hara here. What we are talking about is the ability to foster a loving environment through speech which is connected to light, as we have seen. And this in turn will bring about the dwelling presence of Hashem between the husband and wife. Okay? This is important. Let me say that again. Rectifying one's speech between spouses will bring about the presence of Hashem between the two of them. The Hebrew phrase, Ani ohav otcha, in Hebrew, I love you, in Gematria, is 502. It is also equal to the phrase Shekhinah binehem, meaning the divine presence dwells between them. Okay? So when a person is showing, giving, and speaking in love, in a lovingly manner, in a manner that portrays love to another, it is equal to having the Shekhinah dwell between the two of us, between the two people who are in a relationship. This is great. This is of great importance attached to the use. There is a great importance attached to the use of the tongue. And it's especially important in a relationship on every level. I know I talk a lot about marriage, but just know that even those who are not married at this particular time can benefit from these teachings as well. Every relationship has an intimacy level, and it's best preserved by Shmirat HaLashon. It's best preserved by guarding the tongue. The Torah has much to say about the rectification of speech, but especially in relationship between two people, be it friends, siblings, parents and child, married couples. It doesn't matter. There's a lot of words that have been written concerning the rectification of speech. It's what makes us human. Okay? Speech makes us human, but how we speak determines what kind of human being we will be. Okay, let me say that again. Speech is what makes us human, but how we speak determines what kind of human being we are. I want to ask a question. It's a very, very pointed question, and that is, why do we have such trouble in this very seemingly simple concept? It seems like a simple concept. Watch how we talk to one another. It would appear to be such a simple task to speak words of loving kindness to one another, especially two people who say that they love each other. It should be easy. It should be simple. Two people who love each other ought to be able to watch how they talk to one another. They express that they genuinely love one another, but what comes out of their mouth seems to tell a different story sometimes. One person might say that they love another, and then in the same breath or in the same argument They're saying something different. Yeshua put it plainly when he stated in Matthew 12:34 through 37, "Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." This is as plain as it gets, covering. What is in your heart flows out of your mouth. Two people who are in intimate relationships, such as marriage, will utter some of the most hateful words ever spoken by human lips. And it's because there is something in the heart that hasn't been rectified or dealt with. Okay? People have justifications for why what they say. They feel what they feel, and then they're justified in saying what they're saying. And Yeshua says we will be held accountable for what comes flying out of our mouth. Rabbi Ginsburg, he states it this way: the key to genuine communication through speech is sincerity. Okay? Let me say that again. The key to genuine communication through speech is sincerity. Or in the words of the sages, when mouth and heart are the same. When mouth and heart are the same. We read in Tractate Terumot 3:8 in the Mishnah, and it states, "He who intends saying teruma and says tithe, or tithe and says teruma, burnt offering and he says peace offering, or peace offering and he says burnt offering, I vow that I will not enter this house and says that house, that I will not derive any benefit from this man and says from that man, he has said nothing until his heart and mind are at one." Okay? One cannot say, "I love you and care for you," while at the same time speaking with a hateful tone or hateful words. It's impossible. One will never be able to communicate love when being frustrated, angry, and spewing words that are unpleasant for someone to hear. This is a commingling of one concept and another that doesn't seem to add up. In the ears of the hearer, it doesn't make any sense. You say that you love me, but what you're saying right now does not communicate that. Yaakov, James 3:11 through 12, puts it this way. He says, "Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh." What he's essentially saying is that it's impossible for both to come out of one mouth. So when Yeshua says that Yeshua says that what's in one's heart comes out of one's mouth, this is what he means. Eventually, the truth will come out. If a person feels something in their heart towards another, eventually it's going to come out. And the catalyst for that is going to be anger and frustration. And that's going to reveal what's in one's heart. And people are not stupid. People are not stupid. They know. They know when there is a contradiction going on. We read in Leviticus 13:12 through 13. It says, "And if leprosy breaks out all over the skin, and the leprosy covers all the skin of the one who has the sore from his head to his foot, wherever the priest looks, then the priest shall consider. And indeed, if the leprosy has covered all his body, he shall pronounce him" what? "Clean, who has the sore. It has all turned white. He is clean." Have you ever wondered about this passage in the Torah? I mean, leprosy is leprosy, right? If one has it, then he should be declared unclean, especially if the person's entire body is covered in it. If one has a little bit of leprosy and he's pronounced unclean, how much more so you would think that he would be pronounced unclean if it covers his entire body, but that's not what the text says. I mean, this particular passage here says that the man is covered in it. It's the Seraat of Seraat. It's the leprosy of leprosy, right? But here's the thing. It's not. The leper who is covered with Seraat from head to toe is pronounced clean. And the question is, why? That goes against everything that we would think would be the truth. But see, here's the thing. He is altogether unified in his heart and speech. I talked a little bit earlier about leprosy, biblical leprosy, and how the sages of Israel have tied it to Lashon Hara, evil speech. Therefore, one who is speaking evil speech will receive Seraat, first in his home, then on his clothes, and then eventually it'll be on his body if he doesn't stop, if he doesn't rectify the problem. But here's the thing about the one who is completely covered in it. His heart and his speech are unified. You don't have to guess whether or not the man is speaking truth. You don't have to worry about this one man speaking one thing in his heart and something else coming out of his mouth. What is in his heart comes out of his mouth, and that's simple. So you know what you're dealing with. The one who has a mixture all over his body is the one you need to be concerned about. He's the one you need to call unclean. The one who speaks one thing with his mouth and another in his heart is the one that causes us the concern. In Pesachim 113b, in the Babylonian Talmud, it says, "The Holy One, blessed be He, hates three people. One who says one statement in his mouth and means another in his heart." The ideal state of speech is alluded to in the name of the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is the Aleph. The Aleph has a numerical value of 1 and as a word, so you can take a Hebrew letter and spell it out to make a word. Aleph is Aleph, Lamed, Pei is the word Aleph. And so you take that word, it is an acronym for Emet Lemad Picha, teach your mouth to speak truth. It is also an acronym for Echad Lev Pei, meaning one and the same in heart and mouth. And you can see the correlations on the slide. Being Echad, being one, as the letter Aleph suggests, means that a person who is in their heart and in their speech are one. They're Echad. Heart and speech have to match. If one says out of their heart that they love another person, and yet their speech is hateful, ugly, and mean, that's not love. It's not love. And the mouth and the heart are not rectified. They're not unified. This very same phrase has a numerical value of 130. Echad lev pei. It has a numerical value of 130. This is 10 times the word echad. Why? Because the word echad equals 13. And it indicates that when one's verbal expressions reflects the depths of his heart, he has unified all 10 powers of his soul. He's become echad. He's become unified. See, man has this unique ability to hide one thing on the inside and show something on the outside. However, what's on the inside often betrays what's on the inside. That's what Yeshua said. Whatever's in a man's heart, the mouth speaks. You can only hide it for so long. And then certain situations will bring it to the surface and it will come out. This is why speech is so important. You see, a person who has one thing in their heart and something else as they speak outward, is a difficult thing for them to hide because it creates a conundrum and a conflict within a person. It creates a conflict within a person. This is why speech is so important. When one expresses what is in one's heart, when their heart and mouth are unified, it enters into the heart of the hearer. But when the heart and mouth are not unified, then there's confusion and distrust. You understand? When it's unified, it goes into the heart of the person who listens. But when it's not unified, it confuses the person who's on the other side hearing it. One cannot say they love another while at the same time spewing words of hate, frustration, and anger. Either one loves another person and their speech witnesses to this, or they don't, and their speech also witnesses to this. It also witnesses this. The mouth was created for the express purpose of issuing forth words of love and kindness, which issue from the heart. That's why we have this thing called a mouth. This is why we have the ability to express. This is what it was created for. Okay, this is indicated to us by the numerical value of the word for mouth. It's the word pay. And you'll see on your slide, it equals 85. This word 85, pay, 85, is the sum of two other words. And you guessed it, ahava and chesed. It's kindness and love. When a person doesn't use their mouth for its intended purpose, it's called ra in Hebrew, ra'ah. It's evil. Okay? When we think of evil, whenever we think in evil, it's usually couched in our mind in this vision of people sacrificing virgins at the mouth of a volcano while running around holding goat heads. Okay? This is what we think about evil. We think evil, we think about the worst serial killer, serial murderer. We think of Hamas, which is evil, and it is evil, absolute evil. But is that what the Hebrew word actually means? You see, in English, Merriam-Webster dictionary defines the word evil as morally reprehensible, and that's true. What Hamas has done is morally reprehensible. However, the Hebrew word, as defined by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, means breaking into pieces. Breaking into pieces. Well, how then is the word that is defined as breaking into pieces translated as evil? Well, the idea of breaking something into pieces is that evil is using an object in a manner that destroys its intended purpose. Taking a computer keyboard and trying to use it as a hammer to build a house is not the intended purpose of the keyboard. So what's going to happen when you start using that keyboard to try to hammer in nails? So the keyboard was not intended to be used as a hammer, and doing so would destroy the keyboard. It would break it into pieces, and therefore it would no longer be useful for the purpose in which it was intended. You can't plug it back up to your computer and expect it to work. Okay? It becomes broken. So the mouth is intended for speaking life, love, and kindness to others. That's what the mouth was intended for. That is what it was created for. And when it's used in a hateful, ugly manner, then the mouth becomes broken. It's broken. So where does it all begin? Okay? How does a rectification of speech, where does it begin? How do we even begin to address this with ourselves? How does one set out to fix this ailment, which is in the heart and in the mind? You see, this is an internal problem. It's not an external problem. If a person's trying to rectify what comes out of their mouth without rectifying what's in their heart first, they've missed the point. Just like Yeshua said, he accused the Pharisees. He said, you're like whitewashed tombs. He said, you're all clean on the outside, but inside you're full of dead man's bones. The heart is the issue. Yeshua made the same point in Matthew chapter 7. It's out of the heart of Mark chapter 7. He said it's not what comes out of a man, or not what goes into a man. I'm sorry, it's not what goes into a man that defiles him. It's what comes out of his mouth that defiles him. It's what comes out of his heart that defiles him. So I asked the question, how do we set out to fix this ailment that we deal with? Well, ideally, by simply purifying one's thoughts, one's faculty of speech will follow suit, and one will not have to concentrate explicitly on controlling his speech. What one thinks is what comes out of one's mouth. What's in one's heart is what comes out. You see, in Hebrew thought, the heart and the mind are the same thing. So if one is doing their best to try to control their outward speech and not fixing the issue within the heart, they're fighting against the odds. You fix the issue at the core source, and won't have to think about what they say. That makes sense? Pay attention to what's going on through your mind most of the day. What is your thought patterns? What are you thinking about? How are you relating to the world in your mind? What occupies your thought process, especially when it comes to other people? Are other people a bother and an irritant to you? Are you constantly frustrated with other human beings around you because they're not following what you want them to do? They're not speaking the way you want them to speak. They're not doing what you want them to do. These kind of thought patterns directly affect how a person will relate to others. It will. You might be able to control your thoughts, control your speech and not be frustrated when speaking with them. But what about when you're speaking about them to somebody else? Are they words of love and kindness, building them up, helping them in the ways that you speak about them, or are you tearing them down because you're irritated, frustrated, and don't like the way they do things, how they say things, or whatever the deal may be? Do people constantly get on your nerves because they won't follow the pattern that you've set for your own life? See, to think positively about somebody is to say positive things about them. If you're only thinking good about somebody, then your speech will follow that. But if you think negatively about a human being, that's going to be the pattern of speech that's going to follow. It has to begin at the source, in one's thoughts. This is how rectification of speech happens, is by going to the core issue. Okay, so now don't think that I'm sitting here saying that life is all smiles and rainbows for everyone all the time. There are times when the Torah expressly commands that one person should rebuke another. That word rebuke in English has a harsh connotation to it, right? Merriam-Webster defines it as to criticize sharply, to reprimand somebody, right? Come down on them, get on them, be harsh. It has a harsh connotation. We read in Leviticus 19:17, "You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him." So, not rebuking your neighbor is equal to hating your brother. If you take that verse and you put it in the reverse, he says, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. You should rebuke him. But if you reverse that and say that not rebuking your neighbor is going to be equivalent to hating your brother. If this is the case, then surely rebuking your brother is loving your brother. Because in Leviticus 19:18, the very next verse, he says, love your neighbor as yourself. And just tying those two together, if you're supposed to rebuke your neighbor, and that's loving your neighbor, shouldn't you also rebuke yourself? That's loving yourself, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. What is rebuking yourself? It's taking a self-inventory. Okay? Inventory is not about inventorying everybody else around you. That's not the issue. That's actually the source of the problem. See, too many people are worried about other people's issues and problems. Here's the deal. We need to do an inventory of our own issues Take stock of what's in our own heart, what's our own minds, what is ruminating in our own thoughts, and what is producing, what is the fruit of that producing, right? It's negativity and hateful and ugly thoughts about what everybody else around us is doing, then our speech is going to follow that, right? So rebuking another person, as commanded by the Torah, is literally loving them. But see, the proper way of rebuke is to approach the matter in love. Only when the adequate words of love have been employed can a person then bring words of rebuke. There should be no doubt in the person's mind who is being rebuked that the one doing the rebuking has absolutely nothing but love in their heart when issuing words of rebuke. Okay? This word rebuke, I don't know, it's so harsh in the English. I prefer the word admonishing, to admonish someone, right? That's more of a loving term. Rebuke, reprimand, criticizing, these all have really negative connotations. But see, that's not what the Torah is intending. The Torah is not intending that we rebuke and reprimand and sharply criticize somebody. So that's not what the Torah is telling us. The proper way of rebuke is to approach the matter in love. Only when the person who is receiving the admonishment believes that the person who is giving this admonishment loves them in their heart will those words go into their ears and into their heart, and they will be able to listen. But an admonishment giving in a harsh speech won't affect anything. Proverbs, and this is off the top of my head, so forgive me, I can't call exactly where it's at, but in Proverbs it says, a harsh answer stirs up strife, but a soft answer turns away wrath. Okay, so when giving an admonishment to somebody, it needs to be done in love, but that's only helpful if the person giving the admonishment has already established a level of love, care, and concern beforehand. They have to have nothing but love in their heart for the person that they're admonishing, and the person who's receiving it needs to know that. That foundation needs to already be set. The Hebrew word for rebuke is the word tochacha. This particular word can be split into two. And this is a fairly common way of interpreting by the sages. Interpreting by the sages, an interpretation. You can split the word into two different words. The first word being toch, meaning from the midst of, as you can see on your slide as we've split them apart. The word toch means from the midst of. And then the last half, which is cha, tochacha, is equivalent to the word ahava, love, which equals 13. Thus the word tochacha reads as toch ahava. It's from the midst of love, or from the state of love. In Judaism, there's a rule that states that one must issue 10 words of love before even thinking of issuing one word of rebuke. Before a spouse can admonish another spouse about something, they have to do 10 words of ahava, 10 words of love first. Now, does this mean that they should count off 10 words? They go through and say, you know what, I'm going to say 10 words of love so that way I can get to the rebuke. No. That's not what it's meaning. It's not a literal you have to do it. But what they're saying is that one level should be higher than the other. We should be speaking more words of love to those who are in relationship than we do tochacha or rebuke. And even if we do, it should be a 10-to-1 ratio. The amount of words of love should far outweigh the words of rebuke. And the words of love need to be genuine and they need to be sincere. The person must know with sincerity that the words of love are genuine and they're not just a disguise to win favor so that they can then later rebuke them. You can't trick somebody, okay? If you think at some point that you can trick somebody, that you're just giving words of love so that way you can get back to the things as normal, and that is bringing admonishment about what somebody else is doing, you are sorely mistaken. People are not stupid. They know the intentions of someone's heart. They know whether words of love are sincere or not. The Baal Shem Tov, who is the founder of the modern Hasidic movement, he writes this. He says, when a person is confronted with a shortcoming in another, it is first and foremost because God is showing him, through the mirror of the other person, a fault that in some way exists within himself. The first response then should be to seek out and correct the corresponding fault in oneself. Only then, with the benefit of perspective and when there is no trace of anger or indignation, may one proceed to criticize and correct. Okay, this sheds light on the words of Yeshua when he said, remove the plank from your own eye before you even bother removing the speck out of your brother's eye. He said, rectify yourself first, because what you see in the speck in the other person's eye is literally a plank in your own eye. Through another person, God is showing you your own fault. So how can you be frustrated and angry with somebody else for doing something that we know in our own hearts we're looking at? And it may not be obvious to begin with, but with some cheshbon hanefesh, with some accounting of the soul and taking inventory of what's in our own heart and our own actions and how we deal with the rest of the world, it will become obvious. If something somebody else is doing aggravates you, you need to look in your own heart and go, why is this aggravating me? What is the issue here? And you will find that when you do that, you will find that most of the time it's just a plank in your own eye. It's just a speck in the other person's eye, but it's a plank in your own eye. We read in Proverbs 27:19, as when looking in water, face reflects face, so does one's heart find reflection in another's. Rashi, commenting on this particular passage in Proverbs, says this: the attitude and emotion that one shows when he faces water is reflected back to him. So too with friends, according to what the person knows of his friend's love for him, or the opposite, he shows his own face back to his friend. And Metsudot, also commenting on Proverbs 27:19, says, if one feels positively toward his fellow, this will cause the latter to feel positively about him, whereas the negative feelings will engender and provoke negative feelings toward him. So in short, this means that if you have negative feelings about someone, it will show, and therefore it will be reflected back towards them. It will be reflected back. You see, people deal with other people based on how they feel towards them. And you can't hide it. You can't hide it. And I'm going to say this, how much more so it is in a relationship between husband and wife. Between husband and wife. Aggravation, irritation, anger, disdain will show in a person's words, their face, and their body language. In a marriage, an intimate relationship such as marriage, how much more should one engender feelings of love toward their spouse if this is the case? If one only thinks negatives towards their spouse, then it should not be a mystery as to why they seem to have negative feelings back. It shouldn't be a mystery. As a matter of fact, we just revealed the mystery. The only reason the spouse is relating back towards what is being done is because of what's being given in the first place. As a water reflects the face, so also one person reflects another. If in your marriage and in your home, you find that that there's negativity, negative feelings, arguments, fights, disdain, all kinds of stuff in the marriage, look at fixing yourself, not the other person. Because the minute you start to change, it's going to change the other person's outlook. And you don't do it as manipulative. Because if you do that and then you go right back to the way you were, then when you did that to begin with, it was insincere. And the person will look at that and say, you were insincere and you tricked me. And then you've blown an opportunity. Okay? So it has to be sincere in the heart. It has to be sincere. One who changes the environment. One who wants to foster love within the home. Has to be sincere, and the change has to happen inside the heart. So ask God, God, rectify in my heart. Give me a circumcised heart. Help me to circumcise my own heart, right? An action from below merits a response from above. If you make the effort to rectify what's in your own heart, God will aid in the process of circumcising the heart. Therefore, never going back to the way that it was. It is a rectification. A rectification is not fixing it today and then going back tomorrow. A rectification means fixing it for good, never being broken ever again. Rectification of one's speech means you're no longer breaking things into pieces with your words. 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 13. We're going to read the entire chapter. This is the great love chapter, and I'm running out of time here. I don't want to take up the rest of your evening, but what I do want to do is I want to hit certain highlights that are germane, that are correlated to the topic that we've been talking about tonight, about love and speech. Paul says it right off in the beginning, 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 13. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. You see, right out of the gate, he starts about tongue, speaking. I have become sounding brass or clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, which is speaking, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part will be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know, just as I am also known. And now abide faith, hope, love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. There is so much to be said about this chapter. There's so much that Paul packs in here concerning the idea of love. But there's just a few things that I want to address or point out. And that is, first of all, if anything else that is espoused by a person but is without love, it's useless. Whatever a person does, if it's without love, it's useless. Tongues, prophecy, faith, burning their own body, going through this ascetic idea of I'm pleasing God by punishing myself. Even we shouldn't even do that. But he's saying even if you should do that and you do it without love, it's nothing. It doesn't matter. Love, on the other hand, is self-sacrificing. You see, without all these things, tongues, prophecy, faith, done without love, it becomes a source of pride for the person who's doing it. It becomes self-serving. Look at me. I can speak in tongues. Look at me. I can prophesy. Look at me. I have this great faith. But if it's without love, it becomes something that a person can point to themselves and say, look at me. It becomes self-serving. But love is actually self-sacrificing. But love is patient and is kind, Paul says. Love is patient and kind. There's a reason that Paul puts this at the beginning of his dissertation on love. There's a reason. Relationship without kindness is torture. Relationship without kindness is torture. A lack of patience with someone results in unkindness. It results in an angry tone, an angry facial expression, angry body language. Frustration begins to build up. And before you know it, words of hateful speech begin to flow, and things keep just flowing out of our mouth. And what is the reason that we're getting so angry or frustrated? What's the purpose? Better yet, how can one be angry or frustrated when their thoughts are only good about the person that they're in relationship with? If one's thoughts are good, then their speech will be good and their position of love will be perceived by the other person. If that's the case, there should never be an occasion for frustration or anger to ever enter the picture. Perspective is everything, right? Anger, frustration, hate comes from an incorrect perception of who the other person is. Another person has faults. This is true. But is that the majority of the focus? No. Remember, 10 to 1. 10 to 1 is the ratio. 10 to 1 is the ratio. If you haven't watched my teaching on patience yet, I highly recommend that you go back to YouTube in the archives and look up the teaching on patience that will talk about it in great depth, kindness and patience. And we've already talked about what it means to be kind earlier in this teaching. Kindness and patience are the first two things that Paul talks about. They're essential for everything that comes after these two midot in this passage. Paul puts it up front because without kindness and patience, none of the rest of it is actually going to be attainable. It's not going to happen. So love does not behave rudely. I mean, let's just be honest here. Everybody would agree with this statement, right? Everybody would agree with the statement. They would say, yeah, I agree. Love is not rude. It doesn't behave rudely. You see, the English word is defined as offensively impolite or ill-mannered. It is the default position that one takes when they are hurt or offended by another. They act in such a way they wouldn't dare act in front of others. If one acts that way in public, however, there is certainly a serious issue because most people try to put on at least some resemblance of decency in public. Most people try not to be hateful and ugly to their spouse or to the people that they're in a relationship with in public. However, when they get behind closed doors, it's a different issue. But again, in the Siddur, in the morning Shacharit prayers, in the morning prayers, it says, "Let one be righteous privately and publicly." Right? To be the same indoors and outdoors, in private or in front of people, the manner in which one conducts himself should be the same. You see, there's this idea that we're talking about unity, inside, outside. What one thinks on the inside versus what they say on the outside. What one does in private behind closed doors versus what they do in public. They should be the same. And God looks at that. God looks at that and says, are you being true? And are you doing the necessary self-rectification that is required? Paul says that love is not provoked. How can one be provoked when there's sincere love in one's heart for another? And believing that the other person is not out to get you. The person's not out there to just get you and to harm you and to hurt you. That's another issue that people have in their hearts. They perceive their significant other, their spouse, whoever they're in relationship with, as being out to get them, being out to harm them. But what if, just what if, our perception's messed up? What if what we're seeing or what we think we're seeing about a person is not true? How can we be provoked if we're thinking and understanding and knowing that the person that we're in relationship with has our best interest at heart? Then nothing that they say will ever provoke us to anger or frustration. The issue appears when one believes that there is not love and kindness in one's heart for another. Okay? Let me give you an example of what that looks like. A husband and wife, they're riding in a car. They're riding in silence for a little while, and the husband looks at the wife as he's driving. He goes, "You know, you're critical." So what is the wife to think? What's she supposed to be thinking at this moment? She goes, he just says I'm critical. What does that mean? This can be construed as though he is criticizing her, meaning that she has a critical spirit towards her husband. You're so critical of everybody, meaning she thinks bad and is just ripping into people about what they are and what they do and how they do things or how they speak. But the woman in her mind pauses for just a second. And instead of taking the words at face value or misinterpreting them, she stops for a minute. Says, "Okay, let me think about what I know here. What I do know is that my husband is kind-hearted. He's not an evil person. And I know that he loves me. So let me dig into this. Let me dig into what he's saying to understand where he's coming from." And so she asks a follow-up question. And he responds with, "You know, without you, our family wouldn't be as wonderful as it is. You are a critical part of our family that we couldn't do without." You see, what would have happened if the wife just took the words that were said at face value and proceeded to act on them, to respond to him, to start defending herself against him and getting offended and upset? What would have happened? Well, it probably would have ended up in an argument, and they probably wouldn't have spoken another word to each other on all the way home, and possibly wail into the wee hours of the evening. But because the person decided to check their perception about what the husband was saying, they avoided a pitfall. They avoided an argument. They avoided hurt feelings. They avoided misunderstanding. Okay, so perception of another person, if you think what they're doing is out to destroy you, maybe you haven't thought through the situation enough. Maybe you haven't thought through what you know about that person who said, "I love you." See, love never fails, is what Paul said. Love never fails. When applying all of these principles, there can never be a failure. Are there struggles? Of course there's struggles. Everybody has struggles. But struggles do not equal failure. Failures only occur when a person quits and doesn't try anymore. And the failure happens when the person quits trying to fix their own self, when they quit trying to rectify their own speech and the way that they relate to others in their lives. And then finally, Paul makes this incredible statement. He says, "When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things." This is a hard statement from Paul, because he said, I had to grow up. He said, I had to quit acting in a way that was just reflexive. I had to quit acting in a way that is reflexive to every situation that I'm in. A grown-up stops for just a minute and thinks about the situation. They stop having a knee-jerk reaction, right? Anger, frustration, rude behavior, selfishness, pride, arrogance, they're all childish behaviors. And this is what Paul is saying. Like it or not, Paul is saying these are childish behaviors. And he said, once I finally got grown up, I needed to start thinking like a grown up and quit thinking like a child who just instinctively reacts. There comes a time when a person needs to evaluate their life and their conduct to see whether it matches up with the definition of what Paul lays out in 1 Corinthians 13 as love. If personal growth is not taking place, then one must ask themselves the question, why? Is it because I'm not putting away the childish things? It's beloved, I'm not telling you anything I haven't already experienced or don't deal with. I'm not out here pointing fingers at anybody else. God has done a tremendous work on me. God has brought me through a lot of issues that I, at one point in my life, was not thinking about. I told my wife this the other day. If I could go back to myself from 20 years ago, if I could go back to myself and meet myself 20 years ago, I'd just punch myself right in the mouth and I'd tell myself to shut up. Because I didn't know nowhere what I thought I did. And God has done a tremendous work to bring me where I'm at, and I'm just sharing with you. I'm just sharing with you what God has revealed to me in my life. And I just want to leave you with one last thing. If during this teaching all your mind did was to think about someone else who needs to learn and apply all of these principles that we've taught in this lesson, then there is some serious self-evaluation that needs to take place. We are all responsible for one person, and one person only, and that person is right here. I'm responsible for me. I'm not responsible for changing anybody else. But I do know this. God has told me in the Word, and through the sages of Israel, they have told me that if I rectify myself, Yeshua said himself, before you remove the speck from your brother's eye, take the plank out of your own eye. If I'm going to do a rectification in a relationship, it starts with me. It doesn't start with anybody else. And if I think I've reached a place where I'm okay, I'm seriously mistaken. If I reached a place where I think I'm okay and my relationship is still in a mess, I'm mistaken. I'm wrong. It's not the case. If I rectify myself, then relationships around me are going to prosper. If we want a loving home, we have to create a loving home. It's not just going to happen by magic. It's not going to happen by just saying, I want a loving home. It's not how it's going to work. It comes through avodah, work. It comes through ahava, love, and chesed, patience and kindness, savlanut. It comes through all these different things in which we are projecting into our home. We're literally affecting our home with what comes out of us. And the rectification begins right here in the heart. Yeshua made it rather simple for us. He said in John 13:34 and 35, he says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Yeshua made it plain and simple. Love one another. So it's up to us to figure out what that means and how we're going to apply it. And Chavarim, I hope that today, through the grace of God, we have given some tools to open up our understanding about what he means by saying that we need to love one another as he loved us. As I have loved you, that you also love one another. Let's take Yeshua's example, apply it into our lives, and begin the rectification process, or continue the rectification process. Let's all move to another level. Let's get to a place we haven't been before. So I thank you for joining me this evening. I hope you've been blessed by this teaching. And I pray that you have a wonderful week. Shavua Tov and Leitrot.